Welcome, everyone. This is the May 15th exclusive. And this week we are excited to invite and have with us JD Dillon, who's written many books, The Modern Learning Ecosystem. I know that book, and he's got new books coming out, and he's going to be part of my book that's coming out. And there's all kinds of cool stuff that JD is doing besides his full-time actual gig. So we're happy to have you here today, JD. And we're going to talk today about performance enablement, which will mean inevitably we're talking about frontline workers, which I know is the subject of your upcoming writings. So let's dig in. Why don't you I would love to hear your definition of enablement and what does performance enablement mean to you?
Help people do their jobs effectively every day. I think it's pretty straightforward, right? I think we often overcomplicate our world when we talk about things like learning, right? These deep mental, we say things like brain-based, when in reality, it's just what can I do to help you be successful? And I think you and successful varies, right? Because every person is different and has a different, not just goal, but reason for wanting to attain that goal or wanting to work in this organization. When you talk about frontline workers, which for context, anyone directly working with your products and services is the core part of their job every day. So retail associates, restaurant servers, manufacturing line workers, delivery drivers. In frontline capacities, I think we often talk about, and people advertise jobs by saying, oh, it's not a job, it's a career, it's an opportunity, which I think is great. But there are also a lot of people who are working there because they need to work there, right? Because I need a paycheck because I have people to take care of. And that's what I'm interested in now. And maybe a year from now, I might see an opportunity. Situations change. And now I want to talk about career. But today, I just want to do good. And I think when you come from an enablement perspective, and why I use the word enablement a lot more than I use the word learning, it opens the door to not just the types of tools and tactics and methods I can use to try to help people be successful. It often also opens the door to acknowledging and embracing and working within those varying motivations. Because while everyone is doing the job for different reasons, I have yet to find someone who wants to do bad, right? I started my career managing movie theaters and theme parks. So I am from frontline work and spent most of my time before going into the tech side of the world, directly working with frontline workers and how we build technology for frontline workers. And in all of those touch points and in the hundreds of people that I've worked with directly in different types of frontline jobs, I've never encountered someone who wanted to do bad. I've met a lot of people who didn't do a great job for different reasons, but I never met someone who said, you know what I want to do today? I want to get hurt at work today, or I want to get screamed at by a customer for as long as possible. But that doesn't happen. So I firmly believe everyone wants to do a good job, but the reason is different. But I think they all deserve a chance. And I think when you look at things from an enablement perspective, we can do our best to give people that chance and connect our support to their motivation and how they see opportunities in the workplace.
I love the talk about motivation as the driver because I think often when and I say that like we, the royal we in the learning industry or this learning technology space, there is an assumption that goes into a lot of the discussions that everyone wants to learn. And what I really love about what you just said is everyone really does want to do a good job or is trying to do a good job. It's not necessarily that they see it as I want to learn something. They see it as I want to be successful in this job. And maybe that does lead to new opportunities and that does lead to a career. But just today, I want to do a good job. And I think that's a really important distinction when we're thinking about like how are we helping folks do a good job and what are we providing them to support them in performing well in their job. The other thing which I love in what you said, which I'm going to call out, is a lot of times we think about like a future state. What can we do to help you get to the next stage of your career? Or how do I've focused a lot on skills and skill data. So what skills do you need for the future and how do we help you in the future? But the reality is we need to help you do a good job today. And that the kind of present state, how do we help you be successful in your current environment with the current things you need to do can't be ignored in this kind of conversation around how things are changing and all of the things that we talk about in terms of what's coming and what the future is going to look like ignores the fact that there's work that needs to get done today, people need to do a good job today, etc. Okay, so the real question is, why is performance enablement so hard? Like, why? Because it feels like this is the thing we should have figured out how to do their jobs today, and that people are on the job. So, what are the things that you think make this an ongoing challenge and conversation for organizations supporting their workers?
I think it's one thing. So I'm going to make it real simple and real complicated at the same time. And I think it's a factor we don't talk about directly in the learning and performance profession. And it's something that I think directly spider webs across all of the things we do talk about. Let's take one thing that we talk about a lot: seats at tables. We are obsessed with furniture as a profession. And I don't think I think we're having the wrong conversation in that area, as well as a bunch of different areas with these kind of, we're talking about the symptoms as opposed to the root problem. And spoiler alert for my session next week at ATD 25 in DC, I'm talking about influence in one of my sessions and how you get people to think differently. And one of the factors in that conversation is legacy. I think we have a tremendous legacy to overcome as a learning and performance function, partially because of what we have historically done to people. Note the two people. Not because of our own doing. That's the thing I always like to remind people. It's not like L&D's done bad. No, that's not it. But over time, there are a lot of circumstances that we found ourselves in and we couldn't dig our way out of. Example from retail. A lot of retail employees' version of new hire training includes some variant of 2 days spent in a back room staring at a screen for 8 hours a day. I have physically watched someone quit in the middle of that experience because they just said, nope, and left. And that was it. I don't think anyone inside of that company said, including L&D, would be a good idea. Let's take these people who were really excited to work with their friends and work in a store they really like and sell products they're really into. They really like sneakers, so they were excited to sell sneakers. Let's put that person in a back room for 2 days and have them just fire hose with information. This is good, right? No one said that. L&D didn't say that. Compliance didn't say that. The operations management team didn't say that. But circumstances led us there because, we have to get through all of this content, regulatory reasons, right? Subject matter experts said people can't sell or use the POS or whatever that might be until they cover this. So we just found our way there, especially when we had a limited tool set that we could deploy, right? If e-learning was our only option to deploy information at scale consistently, here we are with a lot of Captivate modules that people have to check their way through. And we did our best with what we had. And I think we have yet to confront the legacy that informs that eventuality, because it's not only the legacy of what learning and development has historically done or the tools that we've used or the approaches that we've taken, it's people's legacy perspective on education. The vast majority of people that we work with, whether they be subject matter experts, stakeholders, executives, and the like, they went to school. So they have a certain idea of what education is. Or they didn't necessarily go to school, but they had decades worth of corporate training experience, right? They've gone to workshops that had really good lunches. And therefore, it was a good experience, and they want to have one of those too, right? So that kind of just decades worth of what this is supposed to be is wrapped around our attempt to advance practices. And that's when we get into the I want a course type of conversation. So I think it requires us combating. And I think right now there's a door that has been flung open when it comes to rethinking what it means to enable people in the workplace that's going to mitigate the challenge of legacy, either in service of evolving the learning and development function or in competition with or disrupting the learning and development function. That's why it's important to talk about it right now, because the inflection point that we're in is starting that conversation either with or without learning and development.
Yes, I want to talk about this with or without learning development comment you just casually threw in there at the end. But the timing, I'm going to use a personal example. We had an opportunity 10, 15 years ago when immersive tech started to come out to rethink how we were engaging with and training learners in virtual spaces. And we started recreating classrooms in virtual environments where your avatar would go and sit in a seat and look at a screen in a virtual space. It was crazy to me that there was such a failure of imagination
That's
That,
what learning is.
right?
You,
Because
you do,
that was
you,
learning.
yeah, you go
Like,
to a place at a time and you
and
consume a
and
thing.
so why would you ever do that? And so those technologies have struggled to ever gain traction because of the failure of imagination of the folks that were building learning experiences. And we are at an inflection point where we could make that same mistake. That we could say, oh, we're just going to recreate the same environments that we've been trudging along in for decades, or we can rethink this. Okay, so JD, what does it look like if it's reimagined? Like, how does performance enablement change as technology is coming out, as we have new opportunities to rethink this? What do you think that future looks like?
It's a combination of factors where we have to understand what is the organization trying to achieve through work? What's the outcome? It is never learning. No one has ever gone to work and said, my job is to learn, right? My job is to do the thing I was hired to do in service of the outcome the organization is trying to achieve. Learning is part of that story because we're people and we just continuously evolve how we do what we do, pick up information along the way. So we have to understand through the evolution of work that's taking place, because this is not a siloed conversation about learning and development changing. This is work changing. I shared an example earlier on LinkedIn from Moderna, who has fused their HR function and their IT function. Who saw that coming? Right? But it's a great example of we're not just talking about changing processes. We're talking about a fundamental breakdown and rebuild of what work is in service of organizational priority. So we have to understand that first, as opposed to just work on our own backyard. We have to understand how the neighborhood is changing because the HOA has a lot of opinions. And then in service of that, ask the question, okay, that's what the organization's priorities are. That's what we're going to try to achieve. Where do people fit into that? What work is expected to be done through that? And then what is my job in terms of helping people accomplish that work? And like I said, if you drop the word learning off of the conversation for a moment and think about the fact that helping people learn how to do something is part of enablement. It's not the whole picture, and it's definitely not the only way. Then we can start to figure out how do we reimagine our function. A simple example for me, I still don't understand why things like talent development, learning and development, knowledge management, and communications are different functions inside of an organization when we're all acting in service of enabling the employee base, but we often do it with different processes, different tools, and all pointed at the same person who's just trying to get help here. So for me, it looks like walking through that process and then what is the actual experience for the employee? I think it just depends on the type of work that you're doing. But coming back to frontline workers as an example, there are a lot of different lines of business in different industries where historically organizations have relied on kind of legacy expertise, right? We hire people who know how to do these things. If you're a specialty retailer, you hire people who are really into your products. And that ability has faded over time. I'm trying to think of a good example that doesn't get real specific. Let's use a silly example that's not real. Let's just go to the grocery store. Everyone's been in the grocery store. Maybe in the past, you used to hire deli workers because I'm a seventh generation deli worker. This is what we do. Not necessarily true, but there's a lot of examples like this. Now you have a hard time finding those people because the world of delis have changed.
Yep.
Apply this to whatever line of business you're in. So it's just hard to go find like a 17-year-old who wants to fill in your deli staff opening because their father was a deli worker and his mother was a deli worker. Like that natural progression doesn't exist anymore. So now you have to sit there and say, I can't just go hire deli specialists. I got to build deli capability. And the question becomes, are you going to try to build specialists now? Because you used to rely on people who had decades of experience, right? They walked in the door knowing how to use a meat slicer. Or are you going to change the job, right? Because you still need to serve fine food products to the people who are waiting in line.
Yeah.
How can we do that, though? Does it require building deep expertise in these different functions, learning and skill development? Or should we be introducing new tools, automating certain parts of the job? Right? Changing the nature of how we get to the outcome and then the role that the person plays. And I find more and more it's less about building deep expertise and it's more about building scaffolding around the employee based on what we need them to do and say, I don't need you to know every SKU that's in the building. I don't need you to know every product that's sitting behind the deli counter. I'm going to give you tools that are going to help you answer questions. And maybe over time you build that expertise, but I need you to get from 0 to 10 and get out there and help customers because that's the priority. So I'm going to build a new tool set around you And over time, we might evolve your expertise. And then you're either going to become more capable or step into an advanced role. But I think all of that calculus changes
Yeah.
because now we have a different set of tools that we can use. Because in the past, even a couple of years ago, if we talk about doing that,
Yeah.
how do I do that with all I have is a computer in a back room somewhere, and we can send people, we can put things on dry erase boards and talk about them at the huddle and then send them modules and videos that they're going to watch. How do I do any of that? Now you introduce a new set of tools, and just using digital assistants as the easy
Yeah.
example. If I, as an employee, in whatever language I can prefer, can ask a question and get a reliable answer right now using the devices I already use on the job, that just rebalances the calculus of what I have to know. And it changes what learning and development might focus on, because instead of focusing on product knowledge, which takes up a lot of that time in the back room, like we said earlier, now I can completely avoid that in a lot of ways. And maybe now I focus on how to have a good conversation with a customer. The type of thing I can't just look up or get help with at the moment. I can focus a little bit more on safety and how to handle those types of situations. So the calculus is changing around what it means to enable a person. But for me, it begins with, are we understanding organizational priority,
Yeah.
where people fit into helping the organization achieve that outcome, and then bring everything we've got to that table to say, how do I help people do that? Because now I've got a lot of new options.
I appreciate your analogy too, because my dad was a butcher.
There you go.
Grew up
Didn't even know
working in his
that.
butcher shop.
But
So
you're not a
like
butcher.
as you were talking, no, but I know butchering skills because I grew up in the butcher shop.
Are
So
you teaching those to your kids?
absolutely not.
There you go. The breakdown of deli related skills in front of you.
I did
But
have, if you know me, I have many children, so they do a lot of things. But I had a child work in a deli at a grocery store for a short amount of time. And the amount of deli related things that he did was almost zero because of safety and skills and training and all of the things. And they've changed processes and things. So everything you described, I have absolutely firsthand seen experienced in my immediate family.
almost like I prepared that example.
It's almost like you knew and you didn't. So it's even more crazy. So you're talking about new tools that are available, and obviously we every week talk a little bit about one of the tools that we are rolling out and have more organizations using, XCL. And I want to just talk a little bit because a lot of what you're talking about is changing processes. It's reimagining what we are focusing on, but it's also getting people out of the back room and being able to do things in the flow of work as part of their regular job and over time rather than sticking somebody in the stockroom for 2 days. So let's just talk a little bit about flow of work and how to reimagine some of these processes because technology is becoming, I think, more and more of a factor, even for frontline workers. Certainly, my experience has been frontline workers are being asked to use and incorporate more and more technology into their day. So, what do you think the opportunity is for more of these flow of work interactions? The other thing I was thinking as you were just talking is the real challenge of this is scaling it. Because if you're talking about like a butcher shop and just teaching someone butchering skills, you can do that in a small contained environment and probably apprenticeship and scaffold over time. But if you're doing this at scale for a retail organization or a hospitality situation, you're not talking about everyone being able to do one-on-one coaching and learning alongside someone who knows how to do this. You're talking about bringing folks in who can do this relatively quickly and then gain those skills over time and get information and access that they need to information as they need it. So what does that look like for you now that new technology and tools are available that we can start to reimagine that flow?
And the balancing act is key, right? Because you're trying to balance consistency with personalization. If you go to a coffee shop, you expect your favorite order in location number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that you visit over the course of a couple of weeks to be the same beverage, not a reinterpretation based on someone's individual experience working in the job, what their manager says, like all of those different things that can create variability when you talk about this type of work at scale, especially when the team that's handling a lot of enablement strategy is physically removed from the people doing the work. Right? You never see the vast majority of frontline workers that you work with as a learning and development professional. So For me, the way we think about it is how do we bring both of those ideas to bear as part of a consolidated experience of work? So it's not about, like I mentioned earlier, there's applications for everything, and the employees trying to figure out how do I make all of this make sense as part of what I'm here to do today, which is prepare beverages and serve them to customers. So I think one, you're seeing a significant amount of consolidation in the technology space where it's not about I have a learning application, I have a communication application, just like we shouldn't, like I asked the question around function. Like how am I managing as an employee that I get information from all these different sources structured different ways, but it's all in service of help me do my job better. So one, the technology itself is consolidating that experience. So it's becoming less and less about I go different places to do things. And it's no, we bring the experience together in service of helping you do the job and then using data in a way that we can identify where are your particular needs instead of wasting time because you've been a barista before in several different companies. We probably don't have to handle certain things with you. You know how to do certain stuff, but you don't know how to do it here or to use our ingredients to prepare our beverages with our equipment. So how do we focus on the right things with you while still not avoiding certain boxes that have to be checked? Right. So it's a calculus to say we got to do certain things because of regulatory realities. We need to do certain things to drive consistency within the operation, and then certain things to accommodate the individual needs of that employee and where they are to maximize their potential, and then also maximize the resources of the organization because there's so much time and money wasted on training people don't need for one of those reasons. So my team's working to figure out that balance with the organizations we work with at scale, like you said, of tens to hundreds of thousands of people. And it's also the reason why I can't go into a public space and not immediately try to identify where all of the screens are. I just can't. If I walk into a store or a restaurant or a theme park, I'm spending less time focused on what the customer experience is and more on what model phone is that employee holding. I just can't not do it. So I think that's the other key is we often look at one, what devices are used as part of the job in the flow of work? Because if we don't have an access point to help the person, it changes the calculus of what that strategy becomes. And in more and more cases, it's, oh, how do we piggyback onto or become part of other IT infrastructure projects? So it's not about deploying hardware in service of learning and development and performance. It's about the hardware and the tools are deployed in service of the operation. And then how do we integrate the experience of enablement with those tools as best we can because of the fact that screens are more and more prolific. And then when you understand where the screens are, build the strategy around it. Because in some cases, everyone in an operation is holding a device. That's one strategy where maybe in a manufacturing facility, there are centrally located devices. There are tablets at certain workstations or there are centralized desktop computers. Okay, we have to adjust our strategy around the workflow and where technology fits into it. So again, I keep coming back to calculus because I think especially frontline enablement is a challenging math problem. But when we do the math correctly, we can balance the reality of how work is done, the priorities of the organization, and then the needs of the individual, because even two people who start in that deli on the same day, one of them is from your family and they have a legacy of deli work. So they know a lot of things. And the other is just a 19-year-old who's starting his first job and we needed help in the deli and that's where they're working now. And they got to start from a different place. So calculus, but technology, especially with data and AI's capabilities, is helping us rebalance that equation.
And for today's session, we actually invited Rochelle Miller, who is at Wood Grain. And JD, when you were working on putting together your Frontline book, you and Rochelle got connected. And so maybe you all could just quickly share a little bit of that story with us about how we came to be connected and what Rochelle was dealing with, the challenge that she was dealing with.
I'll throw it to Rochelle because I honestly don't remember, besides you reaching out to me, how the story begins.
True story, true story. You put out the post about your book coming out and does anybody have experience with frontline workers? And working in a manufacturing company, I definitely have experience with frontline workers. I've been in manufacturing for about we're going on 10 years now. The manufacturing employee experience is so much different. I came out of education, so I came out of the classroom. And when you're talking about people who are, whether it's a line or whether it's a workstation where everybody's focused on the same situation, we're in that fun space where we have workstations and some people get to touch them, but maybe not necessarily everybody because you've got leads at that station. But you have to think there's so many things that you have to think about when you're thinking about access for all the employees. Who needs to know what, who's actually performing the work at the machine, and then who's performing the work on the computer. There's transactions that have to be done to catch the inventory that's processing all the way through. Connecting with JD has been really great to think about all the access, all the points of contact, going exactly into the what do people actually need to have, and then thinking about what XCL has capable. Because when you think about too, those people out on the shop floor oftentimes don't get the email address capability that the people in an office setting are going to get. So that's a whole nother complexity to, okay, you have a SharePoint, or, oh, you have an LMS, but how far does that actually go? And how many clicks are we asking people to go through to be able to access the education that you want them to get to be able to do the work that they need to do? So there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of change that we're continually working towards, and hitting a few roadblocks on the way, but it's good to be able to start the conversation with actual solutions.
Yeah, that's
And
what I love about that work and what JD's been working on, because it really is a good example of why we have to rethink the learning ecosystem, because not everybody's sitting at a desk. And a lot of people don't have logins, and a lot of people are doing training that has nothing to do with a bunch of employees. So there's just so much that's going on.
And just people, I think, don't understand the complexity that's introduced when you say frontline employees don't have an email address.
Yeah.
Like there's a domino that happens because it speaks to not just, oh, they don't get email, which does short circuit your ability to talk to the workforce. I always joke, I think most people wish they didn't have a company email address, but when you don't, suddenly, not only can you not reach people directly with the most common form of workplace communication, what else do they not have access to because of what that requires as part of the IT infrastructure? And you suddenly start to realize how far removed the corporate team is. And in my work with my team, sometimes it's the simplest problems that we help people solve. We've had a variety of executives and CEOs who were talking about learning technology and adaptive learning and reinforcement, all these interesting tactics. But they get enamored with the fact that, you mean if I shoot a video in my office, I can send it to all of the frontline workers? Like, simple. That feels like we should have jumped that hurdle decades ago. But in most organizations, that's still a really hard thing to do because frontline employees still rely on games of telephone. And if I don't make the pre-shift huddle that day, I may not know whatever that information is because of our reliance on certain methods. And not to say pre-shift huddles are bad. They're awesome. They're a meaningful part of the enablement conversation in these spaces, but they can't be the anchor point because they just don't work for everybody. So that's why I think we discount the fact that we force frontline employees to rely on corporate hand-me-downs so often. And we think, oh, yeah, the application has a mobile app, so it'll work for frontline workers. But is it designed not just for access to frontline workers, but how frontline work is done? Because it is meaningfully different. Learning isn't different. People. We're all talking about people. People learn the same ways. But how they work and how that influences the experience of learning and performance wildly changes in a manufacturing space versus a retail space versus a contact center. So again, calculus.
And I love what you just said there, JD, about we should have solved this a long time ago. And what I see is that there have been lots of tools where we could broadcast things out, but very little that would allow us to then track and see who's actually engaging with the content. Is this having an impact? That loop of, yeah, we can broadcast, but how will we know if this is useful? How will we know if people are engaging with it? How do we know what's happening once we throw it out there? That has been a challenge that I've been super excited that XCL helps solve, which I think is like, how do you then close that loop so you're actually getting the data back about how this content is being received and what's happening once it's out there with the frontline workers in the wild, with all of their personal email addresses and all of the things that have been such a barrier for a lot of the platform and kind of more historical tech that we've used for learning. Maybe, honestly, we could talk all day, and we probably just need to do our own little conference on this and just talk.
The day I host my own conference, things have gone very wrong in the profession.
That's All right. We'll host a conference and just invite you, and you can show up and hang out. I have loved this conversation. This has been fantastic. Rochelle, thank you for sharing some of your perspective on the front line right now, working with those frontline workers at Wood Grain. And JD, always a pleasure. And I always feel like I'm talking to someone incredibly smart when I hear all of your taking the theory and making it really real and practical and applicable to what people are experiencing.
Tell us
And
about your books.
This book is available at the very real website, jdwroteabook.com, which I need to remind people that's an actual web. People think I'm joking when I say jdwroteabook.com. This talks about the philosophy and mindset and legacy that we talked about. The next book, which Rochelle is featured in, is coming out hopefully in a year, if I finish it first. That's the Frontline Enablement Playbook, which takes the frontline side of the conversation we just had. And I curated insights from 50 plus people around the world, including frontline employees, about their experiences. And we're hopefully finishing up the initial draft of that over the next couple of weeks.
Meantime, if you want to read more about what JD has to think about frontline workers and skills, he does have a
I'm in
section
that book
of my
too.
book that's coming out the end of September that is really, again, JD, I think when you communicate and you're talking about things, bringing the very practical and the real into the conversation and not just talking about theoretically, we should be thinking about these things. It's really fantastic.
Tremendous opportunity. Technology is opening the doors. If I don't mention that Sarah is also featured in the book, I will feel bad. Sarah's in the book too. But if you want to follow along with what we're doing on that, frontlineplaybook.com, or I have to say it, jdwroteanotherbook.com.
Did you really?
Yes, that's a very real website, jdwroteanotherbook.com. I do not currently own jdwroteathirdbook.com. We'll see.
You should probably lock that down.
I own a lot of URLs.
I do too. Okay, we're going to wrap this up for everyone. We will be broadcasting next week. Sarah's going to be at ATD. JD is going to be at ATD. So find them next week and join us next Thursday.
Thanks, everybody.